If you know Lord of the Rings, but you've never touched Magic the Gathering's own story, this video is for you. Magic has 30 years of lore, dozens of planes, hundreds of characters, entire wars and betrayals and sacrifices that rival anything in Tolkien. But walking into it cold is, quite frankly, intimidating. There's no obvious place to start, no character you already have a foothold with, so here's the shortcut. You already know these people and the character troupes that they represent, you just know them by different names. So what we're doing is taking 12 of the biggest characters in Middle-earth and finding their closest counterpart in Magic's own story. Someone who carries the same kind of weight, breaks in the same kind of way, sacrifices for the same kind of reason, and by the end of this video, you won't just understand 12 new characters, you'll understand the shape of Magic's storytelling well enough to walk into any other lore video on this channel already knowing where you stand. I know Universes Beyond is a hot topic, but this video is to help bridge that gap between those who are new to Magic to show them the beautiful lore that we have in this awesome card game. So if you're not new, stick around for the lore, and if you are new, stick around for the lore. It's as simple as that. So let's dive in. 12 pairings, the big hitters, hobbits included, let's get into it. Frodo never asked to carry the ring, he inherited it, and once he had it, everyone around him needed him to be strong enough to finish the job, whether or not he actually was. Gerrard Capashen is Magic's version of that exact position. He was engineered, literally across generations, through Urza's bloodline project, to be capable of wielding the legacy weapon against Phyrexia. He didn't know this for most of his life. When the truth came out, it didn't make him feel chosen, it made him feel used. The same way Frodo's journey stops being an adventure and starts being a slow, grinding erosion the closer they got to Mount Doom. Look at the specific shape of what breaks in each of these characters. Frodo's real wound isn't physical, it's the moment on Mount Doom where the ring finally wins, where it claims it for himself instead of destroying it, and only Gollum's desperation saves the quest. Gerrard's equivalent moment comes when he's forced to fight and behead Urza himself in the Phyrexian arena. The man who built his entire life as a weapon, killed by the weapon he built. Both men complete their task. Neither of them do it cleanly, and neither of them fully forgive the people who put the burden on them in the first place. Both of them finish the job, but neither of them come out the other side unmarked. Frodo can't stay in the shower afterward. Gerrard dies, activating the very weapon he spent his whole life resenting having to carry. Sam is the reason Frodo makes it to Mount Doom at all, and the story never fully gives him the credit it gives Frodo for it. Jhoira is the same kind of essential, unglamorous constant running through Magic's oldest story. She's not a chosen one. She's a self-taught artificer and historian who shows up and does the actual work that most characters in the lore aren't willing to do. She teaches Karn, engineers the rescue of Teferi, keeps Teleria running, and just keeps doing it across centuries without needing the spotlight. Sam carries Frodo up the mountain when Frodo physically can't walk anymore. Jhoira spends a lifetime being the person who solves the problem nobody else was paying close enough attention to solve. What makes this pairing land is the range of what loyalty actually looks like in practice. Sam's loyalty to Frodo is famous, but the less discussed half of his character is his gardener's competence. He's the one who keeps everyone fed, who notices the practical details Frodo is too consumed by the ring to track. Jhoira's loyalty works the same way, not dramatic declarations, but showing up with the right skill at the right moment, over and over. Whether that's naming a lonely golem or figuring out the physics needed to unfreeze a friend trapped in time, both of them eventually get their own chapter. Sam becomes mayor of the Shire, and Jhoira founds a people on Kamigawa. But neither of them needed that ending to already be the hero of their own story. Neither of them are flashy, both of them are the actual load-bearing wall of their entire story. Gandalf operates on a timescale nobody else in Middle-earth can match. Centuries of quiet observation, disappearing at critical moments, dying and coming back transformed, always seeming to know slightly more than he's telling anyone. Ugin is Magic's closest equivalent, an elder dragon who's been alive for millennia, who guides events from a distance rather than controlling them directly, who died once, killed by his own brother Nicobolas, and came back changed, still carrying knowledge nobody else has access to. Both of them sacrifice enormous amounts of their own power and comfort to protect people who mostly don't understand what it's costing them. The parallel gets sharper though the more specific you get. Gandalf the Grey falls fighting the Balrog and returns as Gandalf the White, stronger, stranger, slightly more remote from the people he used to travel with as an equal. And Ugin, on the other hand, his return is nearly identical in shape. He comes back from apparent death changed, still recognizably himself, but carrying a weight and a distance that wasn't there before, still willing to show up at the worst possible moment and turn a losing fight, then vanish again the second the immediate crisis ends. Neither of them explains themselves fully, and neither of them needs to. Both of them show up right when everything looks lost and turn the tide almost single-handedly, then vanish again before anyone can properly thank them. Aragorn spends most of his own trilogy avoiding the throne he's entitled to, because he's terrified of becoming his ancestor Isildur, a man who had power and let it corrupt him. Gideon's fear runs on the same engine. Born Kithian Iora, his own hubris got his friends killed on Theros in his youth. Everything he builds afterward, the discipline, the leadership, the refusal to ever let his ego make a decision again, is built directly on top of that early failure. Both men become exactly the leader their community needs, specifically because they're so afraid of becoming the thing that failed the people around them once already. There's a specific rhythm to how both of them lead, too, not by being the loudest voice in the room, but by being the most reliable one. Aragorn spends the entire War of the Ring quietly proving himself worthy of a crown he never asks anyone to give him. Gideon founds and holds together the Gatewatch the same way, less through charisma than through simply being the person who shows up, who holds the line, who never asks anyone to do something he isn't already doing himself. And both of them cement their legacy with a final act of total sacrifice. Aragorn giving up his own extended life at the end of his story, and Gideon giving his invulnerability to Liliana so she could survive Nicol Bolas. Bilbo's defining trait late in life is that he's lived far, far longer than anyone around him expects, carries decades of stories nobody else witnessed, and never quite loses the itch for one more adventure even when he's clearly earned his rest. Jodah is Magic's answer to exactly that character type, just stretched to an almost absurd scale. He's the oldest living human on Dominaria, over 4,000 years old, present at nearly every major catastrophe the plane has ever survived. He didn't get there through destiny or grand purpose. His longevity came from an accident, hiding from goblins in a fountain that turned out to be magic. There's something quietly moving about how both of them treat their own longevity. Bilbo spends his last years at Rivendell writing his book, content to let younger hands finish the fight he started. Jodah, despite 4,000 years of accumulated grief he's had to actively manage just to stay sane, keeps teaching, keeps advising, and keeps showing up at the edge of every crisis Dominaria faces. Neither of them needed to keep going, but both of them decided the story was still worth being a part of. Like Bilbo, he's an unassuming figure who somehow keeps ending up at the center of history anyway, and keeps choosing to stay useful rather than simply rest on everything he's already accomplished. Gimli carries centuries of dwarvish grudges into a fellowship built almost entirely around species that his people have historically distrusted, and yet, by the end of the story, he's the one who formed the deepest, most unlikely friendship of the whole quest, with an elf no less, the one race dwarves are supposed to resent the most. Koth's whole arc on Mirrodin runs on that same stubborn, heritage-bound loyalty. A geomancer devoted to his home plane and deeply suspicious of outsiders and of Urza himself for what Urza's presence eventually cost Mirrodin. Koth spends a long stretch of his story furious at people he's forced to work alongside of anyway. Like Gimli, what eventually breaks through his suspicion isn't a grand speech, it's just time, shared danger, and people proving themselves reliable one crisis at a time. Both of them are proof that loyalty built on old grievances can still bend, slowly, into something that looks a lot like family, as long as the people around you are willing to earn it. Boromir is noble. He genuinely wants to save his people, and under pressure, he breaks, tries to take the ring from Frodo by force, does something he knows immediately is wrong, and spends his final act trying to atone for it by dying to protect Merry and Pippin. Ajani's story runs the same shape at a much larger scale. He was completed during the Phyrexian invasion, turned into a weapon aimed at the very people he'd spent his life protecting, including Elspeth, one of his closest friends. Once freed, Ajani doesn't get to simply move past it. He carries the guilt of what he did while completed for a long time, exiling himself, refusing forgiveness even when it's offered to him freely. What makes both of these characters work is that neither story lets them off easy. Boromir's dying words to Aragorn are an apology, not an excuse, and Ajani spends real time actively pushing away the people trying to comfort him, because accepting comfort feels like letting himself off the hook for something he thinks deserves to stay heavy on his shoulders. Both of them eventually find a kind of redemption, but only after refusing every easy version of it at first. Both men are fundamentally good people whose worst moment nearly defines them, and both spend the remainder of their story trying to be worthy of the trust that they broke. Galadriel is ancient, radiant, and carries enormous unseen weight. She's been fighting a losing, exhausting war against darkness for so long that by the time we meet her, restraint itself has become her defining trait. She's offered the ring and the power to remake the world in her own image, and she refuses it, specifically because she understands what that kind of power does to people. Elspeth's arc ends in the same register. After dying twice, after a childhood in a Phyrexian prison, and a lifetime of losing every home she found, she returns as an archangel, radiant, otherworldly, carrying power that could easily curdle into something else, but she doesn't let it. Every ounce of that power stays pointed outward, at protecting other people and never at herself. The test herself against temptation moment matters here too. Galadriel's refusal of the ring is one of the most famous scenes in the whole trilogy precisely because we get to watch her seriously consider it before turning it down. Elspeth's equivalent test comes earlier and quieter. Her years of exile and grief could easily have hardened into something bitter and self-serving, the way it does for several other planeswalkers who've suffered comparably, but it doesn't in her case. She keeps choosing other people, over and over, long before the Archangel wings ever show up to make that choice visually dramatic. Both of them could become something frightening with what they have, and neither of them do. Gollum was someone else once. Smeagol, a person with a name and a life, before an obsession with reclaiming something he lost hollowed him out into something barely recognizable. Sarkhan's fallen Tarkir Dragonstorm follows an almost identical pattern. He was once a planeswalker who could transform into a dragon and really loved dragons. Reverence, not obsession. His age and hardship broke that connection, left him weak and humiliated in his mortal form, desperate enough that he let himself be manipulated into a corrupted ritual just to get his power back. The method of the fall matters as much as the fall itself. Smeagol murders his own cousin for the ring, and spends the rest of his life defined by that single, private moment of betrayal, circling it obsessively even as everything else about him decays. Sarkhan's turning point is just as specific and just as monstrous. He hunts down and eats the heart of a newly born wild dragon to fuel the ritual that transforms him, killing the very thing he claims to worship in order to reclaim a version of himself he's lost. Both of them get exactly what they wanted. Neither of them get to keep being a person though, once they have it. It worked. It almost cost him the last of whatever made him recognizably himself. Both characters are tragic specifically because you can still see, underneath the wreckage, who they used to be, and that's exactly what makes their monstrous choices land as tragedy instead of simple evil and villainy. Sauron isn't really a character with scenes and dialogue in most of the story. He's closer to a force, an ideology given shape, something that corrupts everything it touches from a distance and builds an empire of the twisted and the enslaved. Yawgmoth is Magic's version of exactly that kind of villain. A physician from the ancient Thrawn Empire who crossed every ethical line in pursuit of what he called perfection, sealed away, and used the isolation to build an entire civilization, Phyrexia, dedicated to converting all life into his image. What makes both of them frightening in the same specific way is patience. Sauron spends thousands of years rebuilding after his first defeat, content to let Middle-earth forget he ever existed while he quietly regathers his strength. Yawgmoth does the same thing across millennia on Phyrexia, isolated, unseen, using the total absence of interruption to perfect his methods without anyone alive even aware he was still a threat. Both of them eventually get destroyed by the smallest, least expected instrument imaginable. Sauron by two hobbits nobody thought could make it to Mount Doom, and Yawgmoth by a legacy weapon assembled from artifacts, sacrifice, and the combined efforts of people he never respected enough to see coming. Neither villain needs to be physically present for most of their own story to be terrifying. The damage they've already done, and the systems they've already built, do the work for them. Saruman starts as an ally. He's brilliant, respected, trusted with real power, and he turns, not out of any twisted ideology of his own, but because he decided proximity to real power was worth more than loyalty. Tezzeret's whole story is built on that same calculation run over and over. He's been rebuilt and controlled by Nicol Bolas, worked every side of New Phyrex's invasion simultaneously, and consistently chooses whichever alliance currently serves him best, while somehow still coming across as a genius rather than simply a coward, because he's good enough at it to nearly always land back on his feet. Both of them dress their self-interest up as pragmatism. Saruman convinces himself, and tries to convince Gandalf, that allying with Sauron is simply the intelligent read on an unwinnable war. It's not betrayal, he's just being realistic in his eyes. Tezzeret operates identically, treating every switch of allegiance as the obviously correct move given the circumstances, never quite framing it to himself as the naked self-preservation it actually is. Both of them are undone in the end by the exact intelligence that made them so useful to everyone else in the first place. They're too clever to ever be fully trusted again by anyone, including the people who once considered them friends. Both characters are proof that raw brilliance and genuine loyalty are not the same thing, and that the smartest person in the room is sometimes the one you should trust the least. Legolas is defined by precision, perfect aim, effortless competence, a slightly aloof remove from the more chaotic members of the Fellowship, and a cultural identity as an elf that shapes how he sees everything around him. Narset runs on that same frequency. As Ojutai's favored student, she can absorb the skills and memories of anyone she reads through mind magic, giving her a kind of effortless, borrowed mastery over almost any situation. She's precise to the point of social awkwardness, occasionally has to work at reading her room the way Legolas occasionally has to be reminded he's not the only one on the quest. The friendship arc matters here too, not just the competence. Legolas's whole character opens up once he's paired against type with Gimli, a bond built from mutual respect earned in battle rather than any natural affinity between elf and dwarf. Narset's most human moments come from similarly unlikely pairings, forming a genuine bond with Elspeth despite having almost nothing in common with an archangel, and having to learn, in real time, how to read emotional cues that don't come naturally to her. Both characters start the story defined by their competence and end it defined by who they let get close. And like Legolas, her identity is deeply tied to a specific cultural inheritance, in her case, the Jeskai, and the legacy of the dragon lord who raised her, that she's had to reckon with on her own terms. If you started this video knowing nothing but Middle-earth, you now have 12 real footholds into a completely different universe. You know what kind of story you're getting when Gerrard Capashen shows up, because you've already watched Frodo carry something he never asked for. You know what Ajani Goldmane's guilt is going to feel like, because you've already sat with Boromir at the end of his. You know Ugin is going to disappear and come back changed, because Gandalf already taught you what that looks like. It's not a coincidence just between these two franchises, it's what every great fantasy story is built around, over and over. In different costumes, you see the reluctant hero who never asked for the burden, the loyal friend who does the real work without needing the credit for it, the ancient guide who sacrifices more than anyone else around him, the good person who breaks once, under pressure, and spends the rest of the story trying to be worthy again, the villain who was once someone worth saving, and the villain who never was anything but the damage he causes. Middle-earth and the magic multiverse never touch, that's why it's universes beyond, but you already speak the language of magic lore. If you want to go deeper into any one of these characters, Gerrard, Elspeth, Ajani, Ugin, any of them, you know where the rest of the channel is, and I would encourage you check out any of my lore videos. I really do think you'll enjoy it. So, until next time, we'll dive in again soon.